One of the main arguments that globe believers come at you with is we've known for 2,000 years. Aristophanes figured it out with his sticks and shadows. Well, Aristophanes may or may not have been a real mathematician. He figured out the shape of the earth. That would have made him the Michael Jordan of mathematicians, but nobody ever mentioned him in a book until the mid-1900s.
Excuse me? Mid-1900s? Okay, this took about 5 seconds of Googling. Try mid-1800s, and no, this is not the earliest reference to him. In fact, it references earlier works.
What's crazy is I've talked to some elderly people, and they've told me that back in their day when they were in school, they didn't even learn about people like Copernicus or Galileo.
From Popular Astronomy, published in 1893, I give you Copernicus and Galileo. So, just how old were these people, and did they not read any books?
Everything's up for grabs at this point. People like Christopher Columbus and any other figure in history could be totally false or created just for some sort of agenda.
This is everywhere. We found somebody in Croatia. They said they were teaching flat earth through the 1930s.
That may or may not be true, but I'm not going to take the word of a guy who just claimed that Eratosthenes wasn't mentioned in any books prior to the mid-1900s. That is demonstrably false. Regardless of what shape they were or weren't teaching in Croatia in the 1930s, we can measure the shape of the Earth today, and I hate to tell you, it's round.
The pictures of them show that they're Masons, but I contend that we don't even know if they're real. All of our history is a lie.
So we're supposed to take your word that history is a lie, even though you just lied about what you can find in books prior to the mid-1900s. Gee, I wonder if maybe we shouldn't trust this guy.
In public school in Connecticut.
Tell me your name.
Ruth Heath.
Ruth, and how old are you today?
102.
102. So you were born in
1918.
1918. And we were just talking, and I asked you what shape the Earth is, and what did you say? What were you taught in school in elementary school?
I was taught in school that the Earth was flat.
Where did you go to school? Elementary school.
Okay, let's pause it here for a moment and take a closer look at one of these newspaper clippings. And remember, they are submitting this as evidence that schools were teaching that the Earth was flat until recently. So what does this newspaper actually say? Here's the article they were showing. It was published in the Cook County Herald on the 21st of April, 1900, and it talks about how a Mr. Ebenezer Breach is going after a Sir John Gorst, who at the time was the Vice President on the Committee of Education in England. If you honestly read this article, it becomes very obvious that this was written tongue-in-cheek. It's satirical. They don't actually believe the Earth is flat, and they don't actually believe that Sir John Gorst should be prosecuted for teaching that the Earth is round. But they're pointing out the absurdity of Mr. Ebenezer Breach going after Sir John Gorst for having that taught in schools. And for evidence of this, we have to look no further than May of that year, when they published this story about an unusual suicide. Let's take a look. It starts off in the very first sentence referring to our existence on this mundane sphere. That's right, this newspaper does indeed believe that the Earth is round. But this is not the only newspaper that published a story about Mr. Ebenezer Breach going after Sir John Gorst. We can find other clippings about that story as well. This article was published in the Los Angeles Herald on the 28th of August, 1899, titled "Believes the Earth is Flat." And as you can see, it talks about how Mr. Ebenezer Breach filed an ultimatum against the school board to try to change what they were teaching. You see, they were already teaching that the Earth was round. He was trying to change it. This goes back to what I said at the beginning. These articles were being submitted as evidence that they were already teaching that the Earth was flat, and that it only changed recently. This is not true. This Ebenezer Breach was trying to change what they were teaching in schools, to try to force them to teach that the Earth is flat, because that is not what was being taught at the time. And sadly, I have to say that going after school kids and trying to influence them with flat Earth misinformation is a tradition that flat earthers are carrying on even today.
I went to Spur Glen School in Hamden, Connecticut.
Okay, I admit this is going to be nitpicking, but I'm not going to let this slide. I like how they took a CGI render and made it black and white to try to make it seem like a vintage photo. Yeah, here's where that comes from. This webpage talks about the construction of a new Spring Glen, only completed in 2003, at the site of the old campus. Again, it's a minor point, but since you guys made the photo black and white to try to make it seem vintage, I had to point out that dishonesty.
So how does it make you feel to realize that you were right as a kid?
It makes me feel better.
It does make you feel better, right?
Oh, it makes me feel alive.
Oh my God, that is so true. My whole life, I believe, what I was taught.
That's
and then
right.
when I discovered the flat earth,
You feel better about it.
because we are the center of creation.
That's right.
We are important.
That's right.
We are
We
here.
are God's children. And when all the problems that are happening in this world today,
I'll give you some good news. A lot of the problems that they report on the news aren't even real.
that's right. That's right.
They're just keeping us in fear.
Keeping up. That's right. That's right. That's right. I understand that. I understand. They just say what they want people to know.
That we never went to the moon, that was all fake.
Is that right?
Okay, in this section, I have to come right out of the gate and say that I find this to be highly exploitive of an elderly individual, and I strongly condemn this kind of behavior. There was more of this interview that they didn't air in the documentary, and I found a video containing some of the missing material on a BitChute page that apparently was a copy of a TikTok page. In a moment, I'm going to zoom back into the actual video of the interview because I want you to pay attention to Ruth's face as she takes in some information, but that's why the video quality is going to reach potato levels, because I'm punching into a video that was copied off a BitChute page, which is limited to 480p, so the resolution is going to be quite poor. But they cut away from her face and showed some other images in the actual documentary at a time when she was lighting up with information she was receiving from DRTRH, and I want you to look again and see how she's reacting to the information that's being provided to her, because she's not simply being questioned here. She is being provided information, and she is of course reacting positively to these interactions with this gentleman who has come to visit her.
Did you know, wait, let me ask you a question, just switching topics a little bit, that we never went to the moon, that was all fake?
Is that right?
That's correct.
Is that right?
That-
Is that right? I saw that all happening.
Yeah, so did I, and we all believed it, but that was just to reinforce that people to believe they can live on a ball and they could walk on a ball.
Okay, that right there is the face of an elderly woman who is exhibiting interrogative suggestibility. She is taking in the information he is providing to her uncritically and agreeing with it and adapting her own responses and behaviors to conform to the information he is providing. Here is a peer-reviewed research study on interrogative suggestibility in the elderly, published in 2020. As described in this paper, suggestibility is defined as a process of communication resulting in the acceptance with conviction of the communicated proposition in the absence of logically adequate grounds for its acceptance. Once again, quoting this peer-reviewed paper, interrogative suggestibility is defined as the extent to which, within a closed social interaction, people come to accept messages communicated during formal questioning, as a result of which their subsequent behavioral response is affected. The authors go on to say that interrogative suggestibility plays a significant role in explaining the reliability of eyewitnesses, and particularly whether distortions caused by misleading questions can affect the eyewitness's memory and testimony. They go on to say that interrogative suggestibility has not been well studied in the elderly, and so for that reason, they conducted a study at a range of ages from 55 all the way up to 75 and older. The Gudjonsson Suggestibility Scale 2, or GSS-2, referenced in this table, has two main components to measuring suggestibility: yield and shift. Here's how it works. The GSS-2 starts with the questioner reading a short story with 180 words, and then asking some questions to ensure that they're retaining the knowledge. But then they start asking misleading questions, questions with no correct answer or false information. The yield section is used to determine whether or not the participants started giving the wrong answers based on the questions that were being asked before they even received any feedback. 15 out of 20 questions that were asked in this section were actually misleading, so the yield section has a maximum suggestibility score of 15. After those 20 questions are completed, the questioner then provided negative feedback, telling the participant they didn't do very well in the last section. They then ask the same 20 questions all over again and take down their new answers. The shift section measures how much they shifted their answers from the previous section based on this negative feedback and influence that they received from the questioner. Because that negative feedback can be said to apply to all 20 questions that had just been asked, the maximum score on the shift section is 20. What they found is that suggestibility increases dramatically with age, not only in the shift section, where they received negative feedback to deliberately try to get them to change their answers, but before that negative feedback was received, during the yield section, where just the questions themselves caused them to start giving the wrong answers on misleading questions. As you can see, participants in the late adult demographic aged 55 to 64 only gave about 4 incorrect answers out of 15 misleading questions during the yield section. Elderly participants, defined as anyone over 75 years old, gave on average over 8 incorrect answers during the yield section out of 15, so over half of the misleading questions were answered incorrectly by this group, and age was by far the most significant factor in stratifying the suggestibility of the participants. Once again, the yield section looked at how misleading questions themselves shifted the responses and beliefs of the participants without any direct feedback from the examiner. And as you can see, elderly participants over 75 years old had the most significant susceptibility to this. So if we're talking about a patient who is over 100 years old in a nursing home, we can expect them to be highly suggestible to misleading questioning, which is exactly what we see in the DRTRH segment of this video.
We call it red. This is your moment of waking up. It's when you go to see a magician and you know how the tricks are done, and the magic no longer works on you and you're free from the illusion. So knowing this is going to free your heart. Yeah, it's okay.
Well, now everyone watching knows how the trick was done, and frankly, to see this kind of manipulation is disgusting. This is also why scam artists often target elderly people, not just for any retirement money they may have, but also because they know their targets are highly suggestible.
Rockefeller seems to have a role in this. He started the General Education Board and continued being involved with the educational system. The fact of the matter is, the people that have been in control, they're in control now, and they're going to continue to be in control, whether they pass it down or change the name, whatever it may be. But yeah, I mean, whenever Rockefeller's name is tied to something, it's always something to question, that's for sure.
That's a huge red flag for me, that they can come in and change everything we know, all of history.
They really thought they could get away with lying and claiming all of history was a lie and that flat Earth was taught in schools up until the early 20th century, didn't they? Well, they just interviewed a woman that was born in 1918 who they claim was taught flat Earth in schools into the 1930s. Well, here I have a textbook that was published before she was even born, 1917. It goes into great detail about the shape of the Earth, the axis of Earth's rotation, the tilt of our axis, the cause of seasons on Earth, our orbit around the Sun, all of it. They can complain about Rockefeller all they want, but it doesn't matter because you can find textbooks like this one from the early 20th century and even back into the 19th century that go into great detail about all of these things. Now, why are the flat earthers lying about this and trying to rewrite history? Well, the main reason I can see is that they want to try to make the argument all about NASA and modern astronomy. You see them do this all the time. They always bring NASA into the argument, even if the argument had nothing to do with NASA. They want to try to point out what they see as discrepancies in photographic and video evidence. They want to try to make the viewer think that the only reason they currently believe the Earth is round is because of NASA, instead of the reality of the situation, which is that we've known Earth is round long before NASA was created. That's why they're trying to cover up this history of astronomy. It's a pretty bold lie, but it doesn't take very much effort to refute it. A simple trip to the library for any of these books will reveal the truth, and that's that the flat earthers are the ones doing the lying. That's going to conclude part 2 of my debunk of the next level. Stay tuned and subscribe for part 3, and until next time, clear skies.